Today's video will teach the strategies needed to complete an ACT Science Fighting Scientist passage. After you've identified the passage as Fighting Scientist, you'll want to follow the subsequent steps. Step 1. Label the questions. Every Fighting Scientist passage will present you with 2 or more differing arguments about a specific topic. These arguments will be under the label of scientist, student, theory, or hypothesis. Within most questions, there will be a reference to a specific argument. Before looking at the passage, circle the reference and write the number of the argument mentioned next to the question. This process will help you organize the questions, allowing you to jump from question to question based on the argument to which they refer. In this way, you can focus on one scientist or student at a time and answer questions efficiently and with more ease. Step 2. Read the introduction. The Fighting Scientist passage is the most unlike the others seen in the science section. In the other passages, the introduction is not important to read in order to correctly understand and answer the questions. However, in Fighting Scientist passages, the introduction is vital for 2 reasons. The first is that the introduction will tell you what the scientists are going to be arguing about. Knowing this in advance will make completing the rest of the passage much easier. The second is that the introduction contains all of the facts of the situation, which means that all the scientists believe whatever is stated there. Oftentimes, you'll find answers to the questions about both scientists in this paragraph. You'll still be circling numbers and underlining italicized words. You should also underline the sentence explaining what the argument is about. Step 3. Summarize a scientist. Also, unlike the other passages, the Fighting Scientist passages usually don't contain any charts or graphs. This means you must read. After finishing reading one of the scientists, while still underlining italicized words and circling numbers, you must write a short summary about the argument. Make sure to include the answer to the question posed in the introduction, and the main reason as to why the scientist believes in that opinion. You may also consider including the counter-argument, if the counter-argument takes up a large section of text. Step 4. Answer all the questions that refer to the scientist you've just completed reviewing. Again, labeling the questions previously will make it simpler to locate which questions to answer. Step 5. Repeat steps 3 and 4 with the next scientist. It is not important to complete the scientists in order because they each have their own individual opinion. Rather, complete the scientists in order of relevance, based on how many questions focus on a particular scientist. The science that is referenced in the most questions should be the first scientist you complete. Any question that does not contain a reference should be answered last. Now we'll turn to an example of a Fighting Scientist passage from a previous ACT exam. The headings of Scientist 1 and 2 let you know that this is a Fighting Scientist passage. So consequently, we'll go right to the questions. Step 1 taught us to label the questions by looking for references. For example, in the second question, it mentions Scientist 1. I'll circle this reference and write a large number 1 on the side of the question. I'll do the same for the rest of the questions. Then I'll turn straight to the introduction. I'll read through the introduction while underlining italicized words and circling numbers. I'll also underline the main argument of this passage, which is whether the greenhouse gas present in the atmosphere was NH3 or CO2. After reading the introduction, I must decide which scientist to analyze first. Because there are more references to Scientist 2 within the questions, that is the scientist I should start with. Again, I'll read through the paragraph while underlining the italicized words and circling the numbers. After I finish reading the paragraph, it's time to write a short summary for the argument. I need to include that this scientist believes the greenhouse gas to be CO2, as this is the central purpose of the argument as told to me in the introduction. I should also include the main reason as to why he or she believes this. This scientist thinks that the CO2 came from volcanoes and that there was not enough land available to use and store the excess gas. The counter-argument here, why the greenhouse gas was not NH3, received its own paragraph, so I should include it in my summary. It wasn't NH3 because there wasn't enough CH4 to preserve it. You'll notice that my summary does not contain complete sentences. This summary is for your eyes only and should be completed as quickly as possible. Therefore, you shouldn't worry about proper grammar, spelling, or even writing out complete words. As you can see, I even use an up arrow to indicate a higher concentration. Just make sure you can understand what you've written. At last, it is time to answer the questions. As you can see, there are 3 questions that refer to the second scientist. Questions 28, 30, and 34. Let's first look at question 28. Which of the following diagrams is most consistent with Scientist 2's description of how CO2 enters and is removed from Earth's atmosphere? A good summary will allow you to answer most questions without having to dive back into the paragraph. Our summary tells us that CO2 came from volcanoes and was absorbed back into the land. Therefore, the correct answer is F, which depicts this process. You would then go on to answer questions 30 and 34, both of which have numbers in the answer choices. This implies that you'll need a number to base your answer off of. This is why you should already have all the numbers circled. Both of these questions use 360 parts per million given in the passage. Once you've realized this, these questions are relatively easy to answer. If done correctly, you would get H for 30 and J for 34. Lastly, you would proceed by repeating this process with the other scientists until all questions have been answered. So that was a quick overview of the basic strategies for completing the ACT Science Fighting Scientists passages. I hope you enjoyed the video, and be sure to check out our channel for other helpful strategies and how-to videos. Be sure to go to www.wilsondailyprep.com for more online test prep, including daily SAT and ACT practice questions. Daily practice is the key to testing success.